Hello, today's lesson is going to be about classification systems. So far, we've talked a little bit about what a living thing is, and we've found out that they can be animals, they can be plants, they can be people, they can be little teeny tiny microorganisms. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to classify life. So I'm going to minimize myself, and we'll get started. So we're still on the same essential question: how do scientists define and organize living things? So today we're going to be talking about the left corner here. That is where we are going. So here again are the science standards that you will be graded on, that you will need to know. So these are the same science standards through the year. So we will move on from there. So the objectives today that you will be able to do at the end of this video is: I can define genus, species, taxonomy, binomial nomenclature, Linnaeus naming system, domain, evolution, and natural selection. You're going to be able to explain how scientists classify organisms. You're going to be able to explain the two-part naming system and give two examples of scientific names for two different organisms. I can explain how the domain Eukarya is organized and name the 8 categories. Now pay attention to these objectives, because these will be your questions that you'll be turning in at the end of the lesson. Here's some more objectives. I can explain the 3 domains and the types of organisms in each domain. I can explain the theory of evolution and recent ideas that help to prove this theory to be incorrect. I can explain what the Bible means by after their own kind in the account of the creation of living organisms. And there's our science standard at the bottom. That's our substandard. We're going to apply scientific ideas to construct an explanation for the anatomical similarities and differences among modern organisms. How many different living organisms can you think of? I hinted at some at the beginning of the video. Take a second and think, how many different organisms can you think of? Did you think of any of the ones of these? Did you think of an elephant? That's a bacteria. An oak tree. Teeny tiny little plant. A giant whale. Little teeny tiny minnows. That's a weird looking sea creature. A worm. A crab. Sea coral. An octopus. A hippo. You. Ladybug. Armadillo. A teeny tiny little lizard thing. A cheetah. I don't know what that is. Some kind of a little fox type thing. There are 8.7 million types of species on the planet. 8.7 million. And there's thousands more being discovered every day. That's amazing. There's just a small variety of different animals and living organisms. Okay, classification of living things. We're going to be talking a little bit about this chart, just some of the classification parts in the chart. Not all of that at once, but how do scientists classify all these organisms? Biologists place similar organisms into groups based on characteristics they have in common. Classification is the process of grouping things based on their similarities. So basically, it's a way of sorting organisms into what they have in common, kind of like sorting M&Ms by their color. Pick different characteristics of organisms and put them into groups. Do you want to be a taxonomist? Taxonomy is the scientific study of how organisms are classified. Taxonomists will study a newly discovered organism and figure out how to classify and name that organism. Maybe that's something that interests you. Taxonomists use taxonomic keys to help them classify. We'll talk about those further down the road, but you can use certain keys. Does it have 4 legs? If yes, go here. If no, go there. That's the taxonomic key. Adam was the first taxonomist as God gave him the task of naming all the animals. Think about that. The first man ever created had to name all of the creation that God made. Moving on. Binomial nomenclature. What? What does that mean? That's a big word, isn't it? Binomial nomenclature is the system in which each organism is given a unique 2-part scientific name. And I won't kid you, these scientific names are kind of weird, but they are based off of Latin. So that's why they sound a little weird, but you'll get used to them. So it says Homo sapiens, the 2 names given to, well, you tell me, what are Homo sapiens? Can you tell me? That's the scientific name for, do you know? People. Yay, it's people. Homo sapiens. You are a Homo sapien. Okay, let's move on. Oops. What is the 2-part naming system called? Carlos Linnaeus was a taxonomist who grouped organisms by their different features. He gave each organism a 2-part name, which we use today. We call that system the Linnaean naming system. And then that 4th point that was already there, the first letter of the genus is capitalized. The scientific name is always italicized. So Homo is the genus, sapiens is the species. So the first name is the organism's genus, Homo, and species is the second name, sapiens. Okay, so you always get the genus, you always get the species. The first name is capitalized by the first letter. The second name is not capitalized, and the whole thing is italicized. That's how scientific names are written. What is a genus? It's not a genie in a bottle. Genus is a classification grouping of similar, closely related organisms. Each genus category contains 1 or more species. Some genus categories only have 1 species, so that's okay. Some have several, some have 2. You'll just see how that works in a minute. Okay, each genus is the first scientific name in the 2-part Linnaeus naming system, which we learned in the previous slide. So what about a species? What is a species since you have 2 names if you're classifying organisms scientifically? A species is a group of similar organisms that can mate with each other and produce offspring that can also mate with each other. Species is the most specific level in the classification of organisms, and there is only 1 species in a category. So let's take a look at that for a minute. Species is your second scientific name in the 2-part Linnaeus naming system. What are some examples of genus and species? Here's where we get to take a little bit of a look how this works. Well, the genus Equus, I told you the names are going to be a little weird. We have 2 animals in the genus Equus. Can you tell what they are? The horse and the zebra. And you can see that they're both similar in many ways. So they both belong in the same genus. However, they are different species. The horse is the species of Cabalus, and the zebra is the species of, I hope I get this word right, Quagga. And you would label them as Equus Cabalus and Equus Quagga. Hope I'm pronouncing that Quagga correctly. Let's try another one. Okay, the genus is Eratomochyles. And this one only has 1 species in it. That is a sea turtle with the scientific name, Cheilonioidea. I guess I'm not a biologist or I know how to say a lot of these Latin names. But so the species and genus scientific name for this sea turtle is that. Okay, let's move on. Try another one. The genus is Canis. This one I know how to say. There we have. What do you think a Canis is? You've got it. The species is Lupus familiaris. Those are dogs, right? So their full scientific name is Canis lupus familiaris. That's a mouthful. Here's another genus, Calvaceae. And there's two things in the Calvaceae genus. What are those things? Those are giant mushrooms and brain mushrooms. On the left, you have the giant puffball mushroom. The species is Gigantea. That kind of sounds like a gigantic puffball, right? And the other kind of species of mushroom is the craniformis. That's the brain puffball. Can you tell me why it looks, or why it's called the brain puffball? Because it looks like a brain, right? Sort of resembles a brain. So this species of mushroom has scientific names, Calvaceae gigantea and Calvaceae craniformis. They're both in the same genus, but different species. Okay, where do genus and species, what does that say above me, fall in the whole classification system? So here's what you have to memorize. I will circle that for a moment. You need to memorize kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So kingdom, there's also a domain, which didn't show up on here, but we're going to talk about that one in a minute. Maybe it will click, we have to click on it. There it is. All right, so it's domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So it starts with the least specific. So the domain has many different types of organisms in it. And then it gets further and further classified down to finally species, which is your very most specific one type of animal, such as the horse, right? So species is got usually one animal in it or one plant. So you go down from the broadest to the smallest. We'll be talking about that further. Let's just take a look here at a little further classification. So just domain, so let me go back a slide. So just domain here has 3 subcategories in itself. We are going to be talking a lot about these 3 subcategories. So what are those 3 subcategories? They are the Eukarya, the Archaea, and the bacteria. So Eukarya is the one we're going to be spending most of our time in. Eukarya are all the things you're probably familiar with or think of as a living organism. Plants, animals, fungi, and protists are all Eukarya. They have nuclei containing DNA. Remember, one of the qualifications to be a living organism was that it had certain chemicals in its body. The Eukarya have DNA as one of their chemicals, and they have nuclei, which is the plural of nucleus. So in their cells, they have a nucleus, which is the center of the cell. The second domain is Archaea. These are all one-celled organisms only, so they're not going to be any of the common things you can think of, and they have no nuclei in their cells. And then finally is the bacteria category. Believe it or not, it's a very large category. These include one-celled organisms only, and they also have no nuclei in their cells. And there should be another one. They're supposed to also have different chemicals. I don't think that one showed up. They have, so bacteria has different chemicals. I'm going to add that in there for you guys. Different chemicals than Archaea. Okay? Just remember that. It'll probably show up when I click a few more times. Who knows? Okay. It didn't. So, okay, we'll move on. Okay, under Eukarya, this is where we find they're in that domain, and then we further classify them as kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So that is where we're going to be spending a little bit of our time for a while until we move on to Archaea and bacteria a little bit later. So for example, this is a red fox right here, and you can see that his species is Vulpus. Vulpus, it looks like. So anyways, he's in a further genus, then he's in a family, he's a carnivora, so there's going to be a lot of animals in carnivore area in the order carnivore. Then he's class, he's a mammalia, which also is in the same class as you. And then he's in the phylum Chordata. He's in the animal kingdom, which you are not. Well, yeah, you are in the animal kingdom. And then the domain we said was Eukarya. So we're going to be talking more about classifying animals. Evolution and the life species. The life sciences, sorry. Evolution is a theory that all modern species developed from earlier kinds of life through natural selection. The theory was developed by Charles Darwin, who was not a Christian. So he was not considering God in his thinking process when he developed the theory of evolution. For example, evolutionary theorists believe that birds were once dinosaurs, but evolved into birds over millions of years. We'll get into more of the millions of years idea later on in the year, but suffice it to say that evolutionists believe that dinosaurs were evolved into birds. What is natural selection? It is the idea that some individuals are better adapted to their environments, and so they survived while other members of the same species could not adapt and died. The stronger organisms reproduce and make more of their kind, and the weaker organisms die and become extinct. So you can see in that picture, the giraffes that are too short can't eat the food, so they die, and the taller giraffes live and they reproduce and make more tall giraffes. Okay, let's move on. Evolution in recent years. In recent years, scientists have discovered many things in the fossil records that disagree with the theory of evolution. However, if you remember back from our last lesson, just like the mistaken belief in spontaneous generation that living things come from non-living things, remember Reddy and Pasteur doing that experiment? They proved spontaneous generation to be wrong, but still for hundreds of years, people continued to believe the theory was true. That's because old habits and old ideas die hard. So I want to show you this video.
Some creatures are so strange, so different, so bizarre. It's like they're from another planet. Here's a creature that most of us will never see. And once you check it out, you'll be glad. There's a little sea creature called the cuttlefish. And many people have heard of cuttlebone, which you might have in your bird cages at home. But this little creature, they get to be about a foot long, the average one, but yet some of them off the Australian coast get to be up to 3 feet long. But they're amazing because they have a skin that is completely different than anything other than things in their same family, which would be things like the squid or the octopus. They can change the color, the texture of their skin in like a split second. Just like that. I mean, their whole body can go from red to green, just like that. And they have these different types of little sacs. They call them pigment sacs, and with muscles around them. And these tiny little things, when the muscles contract, they squeeze the sac up in such a way that it turns a certain color like a little disc. So their body is just completely covered. They're called chromatophores, with these little discs, but they can make them appear in different colors. And then they have different types of color mechanisms. They have one, they're called iridophores, and those reflect light. So they're using the same types of reflection of light that perhaps a butterfly wing does when they reflect light and show the colors. And then they have others called leucophores, and the leucophores are the white ones, and they have little white dots all through them. So that some of the colors that they make, they're mixing different mechanisms to come up with the color they want. Incredible, just incredible. And they have emotions. They'll get angry. And when they get angry, they might turn red. They'll turn their whole body red, just boom, just like that. And they're red. And then maybe if they get fearful, they'll turn a green or a yellow, or they might just drop down to the ocean floor and turn the color of the sand. Or they might even have little papillae, little things that stick up on their skin, and they'll mimic a rock. Or sometimes they'll even mimic kelp, like they have these 8 tentacles here in front in their face, and they will move them to shape and turn them green, and they'll just float along with the kelp. They have what's called neutral buoyancy. These little animals can actually pump gas or water into their bone. And so if they want to hover in the water, they take a certain amount of water out of their bone or put a certain amount of air into their bone, and they can stay here. Or they can squirt the water into the bone and just drop down quickly. And they think, they actually can think, and they can see very well. Matter of fact, they have a pupil. It's like a W-shaped pupil. It almost looks like Batman when you see a picture of their pupil. And that pupil, they have binocular vision. This strange looking little creature, and its eyes can focus in on one thing. Both eyes can focus together like we do as humans, and so they can spot their prey, and then they want to come up here and they want to kind of confuse their prey before they eat it. So some of these have the ability, it's like they turn on strobe lights on their head, and here comes these lights. It almost looks like the old movie theaters had those lights that went all the way around. Here they go with these lights, and what they think they'd like to eat is looking at that thing, and it's, oh my, what is that? And it almost hypnotizes them. And they turn on all their mechanisms and start shining their lights. And what might this other thing be thinking that they want to eat? I mean, it looks like a UFO or a extraterrestrial or something just coming in there. It has 2 flaps of skin here on the sides of its head, and hidden under that are 2 long tentacles, but they're different. They're their feeding tentacles, and they blow them out like at a party. You get those little things you blow and it goes out. Well, that's what they do with these. They just blow them out and catch their prey, and it's just in an instant, and they get it, they bring it right back, and then the tentacles grab it, and then they can feed themselves. How does all that happen on what looks to be like this primitive creature? Can we, through evolutionary science, first of all, explain how this thing could do this? Where did it come from? Where is it going? Why does it have these abilities that it has? They think, and they see, and they come to conclusions about things, and they know how to stalk their prey, and they know when is the right time to turn on the lights or to shoot out their tentacles that grab the food. They're making decisions. How can we explain that through mindless, random chance processes? I can't do it. Personally, I can't do it.
Okay, there was our video. And go back to our lesson. Okay, so what he was saying was that we can't really explain that by random chance, because the creature is just far too intricate to think that a bunch of cells came together and just randomly formed this creature that can think and act and change its body. And think how much more are we as human beings intricate even further than this creature. Okay, let's go on. Evolution is in recent years. People are now beginning to believe the large amount of scientific evidence that proves evolution to be a false theory as well. However, it may be a couple hundred years that evolution is still believed by the people. And there's a little quote there. The probability of just one DNA arranging itself by chance has been calculated to be 1 chance in, that's 10 to the power of 119,000. So that's like 10 with 119,000 zeros after it. That is the chance that one DNA could arrange itself. The entire visible universe is 10 to the 28th inches in diameter. So it's the chance of it being the DNA arranging itself is even bigger than the universe itself. after their own kind. The Bible instead says, and God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds. The Bible uses the word kind in Genesis 1 when God creates plants and animals according to their kinds. It is used again in Genesis 6 and 8 when God instructs Noah to take 2 of every kind of animal onto the ark, and also in God's command for the animals to reproduce after the flood. You'll see the word kind, the Hebrew min, used in those spots in the Bible. Plants and animals were created to reproduce within the boundaries of their own kind. So there's evidence to support this concept clearly in our world today. There are no reports of dats, which would be a dog and a cat coming together to make a dog cat, right? A dat. Or hows. There are no examples of horses and cows coming together to make a how. So you can only reproduce and make yourself out of your own kind. So that would be a theory, evidence against evolution for the sheer fact that animals can't turn into other animals. They can only stay in their own kind. So according to the Bible, animals appear to reproduce only their own kind of creature. So here is, can a dinosaur become a different kind, such as a bird? So take a look at this one. Tried to put it back to the beginning. There we go.
Did dinosaurs turn into birds?
Did dinosaurs evolve into birds? That's certainly widely believed today. In fact, most evolutionists now classify the birds under the Dinosauria. So you might say birds aren't extinct, or dinosaurs aren't extinct. They're feeding from our bird feeders even as we speak here. Not all evolutionists are in agreement that dinosaurs evolved into birds. Alan Fiducia, for example, who's a very well-known evolutionist, believes that birds are ultimately related to reptiles, but he's not inclined to believe a lot of the current ideas of dinosaurs evolving into birds. There are several problems with this matter of dinosaurs evolving into birds. First, let's look at it from the Christian point of view. The Bible makes it pretty clear that birds were created on the 5th day of creation. The Bible says straight away God made every winged fowl of the air. And we know that all of these birds are not a single kind, but several kinds, because we see in the Levitical dietary laws that there were several kinds of birds that would have reproduced after their own kind. Land-dwelling animals were created on the 6th day. That would include the dinosaurs. The reason it includes the dinosaurs is it may surprise some people, but virtually all dinosaurs are classified as land-dwelling creatures. The flying reptiles, like the pterodactyls, are not considered dinosaurs. The aquatic reptiles, like plesiosaurs, are not considered dinosaurs. All dinosaurs are terrestrial, so they would have been the 6th day creation. From a scientific point of view, I think the evidence is not compelling that birds came from dinosaurs. There's several reasons for this. First of all, of course, dinosaurs are reptiles, although you might wonder if that's even considered to be true nowadays. Many evolutionists prefer to think of dinosaurs as warm-blooded creatures. There's no compelling evidence that they were warm-blooded. But some of the major differences between birds and dinosaurs are not in the bones, but in the soft tissue of the body, which of course is usually not preserved. For example, the reptile lung is quite different from the bird lung. Birds have a lung which, as far as we know, is not found in any other creature. It's a kind of a through-flow ventilation system where the air goes in through the trachea, but then exits from several positions in the lung to go out into air bags that are under the skin and sandwiched between the muscles. We see nothing like this in reptiles. Recently, fossils were found of a dinosaur in which the soft tissue of the lung was reasonably well preserved, not as soft tissue, but of course mineralized. This appeared to be very much like an alligator lung, not like a bird lung. So the respiration is quite different, and to turn a reptile into a bird would require a really radical difference in the whole respiratory system. There are other differences as well. Both dinosaurs and birds, at least most of them, have 3 fingers. That seems to look similar, except that it's been shown that in the case of the dinosaurs, the 3 fingers correspond to finger 1, 2, and 3. That would be the thumb, forefinger, and next finger. In the case of birds, the fingers correspond to fingers 2, 3, and 4. So almost all vertebrates that walk on 4 limbs or fly develop in the embryo with 5 fingers, but here we see the 5 fingers being reduced to 3, and different fingers are used in the dinosaur and the bird, which would suggest they're not related. I think my most compelling evidence that dinosaurs did not evolve into birds is the whole problem of turning a reptile scale into a feather. These are very different biological structures, even though both are appendages of the skin and both contain keratins. They are developmentally and every other way very different. A scale is sort of like a fold in the skin, and several scales are one fold after another. That's why scales are shed as a sheet from reptiles. But feathers are shed in matched pairs in the case of birds. Birds do not shed their whole skin the way reptiles do. So that developmentally the structures are different, and of course under the microscope it's hard to imagine something that differs more than the structure of a reptile scale on a feather.
Okay, so that was from a biologist with a PhD talking about how dinosaurs could not be birds. Okay, let's go, could not evolve into birds. And now I finally have my song to help you memorize your domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Now, I don't think domain is going to show on this one, but just know that there's 3 domains, and we talked about those earlier in the lesson. So let's go on.
Animals traits the berry. See their habitat in their type of babies. So the span in the airs wanted to organize the band-aids. So we made a system we call a taxonomy. So every living thing is sorted in 7 major levels, 7, and at the top, starting by specific at the bottom, the domain, right is rank, it stops with the kingdom, and phylum, class, order, then the genus and the species, kingdom, in phylum, class, order, then the genus and the species. Now let's take a look at the kingdom in a million. The phylum is called data, in class, family, in order, carnivore, in family, canary, genus is the genus, and species, level, genus, us. Get into us. Okay, here we go now. Scientists came to kingdoms. Plants, animals, bacteria, protists, fungi, archaea. And then the phylum divided into 30 phyla. More similar characteristics have in common. Then phyla broken down to classes, then orders, even smaller branches, then families next, more common, genus way close to the end, specific, our species, humans almost sapiens, and phylum, class, order, then the genus and the species, kingdom, in phylum, class, order, then the genus and the species. Now let's take a look at the kingdom in a million.
All right. I like that song. That was fun. Okay, let's escape here and let's take a look at our next slide. Okay, so your homework, and I'll come back, I think, this, yeah. So your homework is to, again, answer the objectives from the beginning of the lesson. Define genus, species, taxonomy, binomial nomenclature, lineage naming system, domain, evolution, and natural selection. Where do you think you could find the answers to these? You could Google and cut and paste, but I do not like that. I prefer you put things in your own words. You could also look on the video that we just did because the video has all of the answers. Your science book is another good reference. That has all of your answers as well. So before you go to the internet and try to cut and paste things that you shouldn't be doing, you should look on the video or you should look in the science book. The video is probably your first and best source for the answers to these questions, as I talked about all of these things on the video. Explain how scientists classify organisms, that's number 2. Explain the 2-part naming system and give 2 examples of scientific names for 2 different organisms. We gave you several in the video. Explain how the domain Eukarya is organized and name the 8 categories. It includes domain, right, as one of the categories. Explain the 3 domains and the types of organisms in each domain. Explain the theory of evolution and recent ideas that help to prove this theory to be incorrect. Explain what the Bible means by after their own kind in the account of creation of living things. So that's all for this lesson. Going to stop and we'll see you next time and have a good day. Bye.